How many of you love the Mercenaries? It's one of the most unique bonus games to come out of the golden age of gaming. Originally an extra mode on updated releases of Resident Evil while new games were pushed back, the Mercenaries has become almost as synonymous to Resident Evil as Wesker, Raccoon City, and other icons to the series. My love of the mode has made me sit and think, as a new RE is on the horizon, perhaps a new Mercenaries is as well. But whether it happens with Resident Evil 9, or as I personally think it should, a standalone title, that Capcom could turn into a money-making live service on par to Fortnite, why not look at the history of Mercenaries and what they should do for the next entry? Now, we will be discussing raid mode and multiplayer modes like Versus as well, but that's going to be later in the video. Though the Sega Saturn release had a bonus mode and Resident Evil 2 had Extreme Battle, the closest origins to the Mercenaries we know and love comes from Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Featuring the subtitle Operation Mad Jackal, the bare roots of a timer and earning score and additional time with kills is front and center, as well as multiple characters, each with unique loadouts. But of course, the mode that became what we truly knew all started with Resident Evil 4 Original. Having every component that would only be evolved on, RE4 had multiple characters with unique loadouts, multiple maps, and the core gameplay of a limited time mode that you can extend by obtaining time crystals and bonus score with a multiplier crystal. This mode was pretty good in terms of arcade style gameplay. For the highest score possible, most people would focus on simply chaining combos and shooting enemies as fast as possible, but one mechanic that seemed merely added to give more distinction between characters, individual melee attacks, seemed to catch enough people that it led to the next innovation in Mercenaries in Resident Evil 5. RE5 has what many would consider the best Mercenaries mode. Taking all the components from the prior iteration, they added bonus time acquired by killing enemies with a melee attack. And considering RE5 had multiple melee prompts, this led to a great mode with a clearly defined skill mastery needed for high scoring. This mode introduced a cap of 150 enemies and added even more maps. Eventually, a reunion version was released which added to legacy characters, and alternate costumes with alternate melees as well. Also, a No Mercy mode which increased the enemy cap to 400 and have significantly more enemies on screen at once. This game took the arcadey gameplay and added competitive play with leaderboard stats and direct comparison to others' skill. As good as this mode was, there unfortunately started a problem with some of the mercenary mode issues right there. The most efficient way to play. Wesker with his dash move became the meta, as well as Tribal Shiva. If you wanted to try and stay competitive, you were really forced to play with these characters. Which many players were not, but to me it set a bad precedence and will influence my personal views when it comes to what Capcom should do next for the next version. And speaking of, let's look at the next version. The objectively worst Resident Evil 6. Now, as hated as the game is, arguably 6 had the best mechanics in terms of Mercenaries. Keeping almost all of the same components as 5, they added special encounters and a skill system which allowed you to add a modifier before starting a round. Due to the high level of mobility, this game mode was fucking lit. I spent most of my time on RE6, specifically on Mercenaries. On top of melee moves, a parry system was implemented which now further increased the skill gap as you netted more time on parries and coup de grace than normal melee attacks. Once again, for extremely competitive scores though, this made a certain playstyle the meta, which consisted of melee, slide damaging, and coup de grace on top of parries for the highest score possible, as well as running the skill for extra time from crystals to net more score at the end of the game. 6 had a ridiculous level of maps, but the mass majority were pretty bad. Some being pretty awkward, too small, too big, things like that. I honestly only remember playing about 4 of them, and one thing that kind of irritated me is that they locked away maps behind pre-orders, which, is a shit thing to do, but it's kind of par for the course for that era of gaming, so. Another thing I kind of didn't like about it was it had a very stripped-back character roster with only one alternate skin for most characters, and that was just an alternate recolor for other skins that would come out later from awards and stuff. So, very lackluster. Honestly, it just kind of just a waste of time. I actually only ran Leon and Agent. I would occasionally run Jake, trying to master his melee moveset, but unlike prior entries, I only kind of stayed on one or two characters, while in the past I would try to get good with most of the characters, or at least try their kit. We're going to skip a little and go towards Resident Evil 8, because that is the next time we have a full Mercenaries mode. I've not personally played it, so most of my breakdown comes from secondhand experience, and what I gather from it is kind of a bridge between raid mode and Mercenaries. You still obtain score and time from enemies and crystals, but you also get skills along the way and can stop at merchant to upgrade your gear. And I kind of just see that as more of a raid type thing than really Mercenaries. But it did add a mayhem ability, which the next game kind of carried over. I don't think I'll ever play Resident Evil 8. It never seemed to be a game worthy of my time, to be honest. And I definitely don't think I'll ever get a chance to the Mercenary mode. But it still is a Mercenaries mode, and we have to kind of include it. And it does have something that the next iteration took from it, so that's why we have to discuss it. And that next game being Resident Evil 4 Remake. This game has what is now arguably the best Mercenaries mode. And what's awesome about it is that it basically took the core components of the original. It took three of the four maps and completely did a new map for that fourth one. And it added the same roster with an additional character and alternate outfits. Basically the standard you should do for any Mercenaries mode at this point. If not, maybe have a little bit more maps. One thing, though, was having the parry available for all characters kind of led to the most boring way to play the game, and unfortunately to me has led to it not being the best Mercenaries in terms of fun. Because of that mayhem capability, you build up your mayhem through kills and parries, and you build it significantly higher when you do a parry, leading to gameplay basically devolving into parrying, popping your mayhem, and getting headshots or meleeing if you're Wesker. This is a huge backstep in gameplay, especially when it comes to enjoyment. When trying to obtain a competitive score, you basically have increased the skill gap exponentially. I do enjoy playing it in the terms of trying to get a competitive score, but I will freely admit this is the least enjoyable game because of how competitive you have to play. On top of that, RE4's difficulty adjustment is present in this mode as well, and leads to some extremely cheap, if not actual straight-up cheating moments. I'm looking at you, Plaga Island. That, coupled with a forced meta, has led me to not really want to play this mercenary mode as much as, say, Resident Evil 5. And that's actually the main reason why I'm kind of making this video and, discussing all of this, because I think Capcom has the capability to make a very enjoyable, captivating Mercenaries game. So now that we have a little bit of context and history, let's look at some changes that are needed and some things that I've heard from players which they would like in this new mode. Now, I'm going to preface it by saying that most of my enjoyment comes from being competitive and having those high scores on the leaderboard. I'm self-aware enough to know that in most games, the competitive and high-skilled players are really not a good representation of the player base, and therefore should not really dictate the balance of the game. But I will tap into my younger self when I used to just enjoy the game mode. And like I said, some of the feedback I've heard from some other Resident Evil fans who have varying degrees of experience with Mercenaries mode in general. The first and most critical change is remove any potential for a meta. As stated, each version kind of had its own way to play efficiently, especially if you wanted that competitive score. What we can do is keep the core components from this game mode and simply balance the designs and the capabilities of each character so we minimize that chance of a meta. How do we do that? Well, melee is a big factor in Mercenaries. So, Capcom, instead of having varying damages and excessive melee attacks, have 3 or 4 melees total that all do flat damage across all characters. So each character would get a unique melee, but they're limited to 3 if not 4. One would be for a head daze, one would be for when they're kneecapped, one for downed, and then potentially one for if they're stunned and you attack them from behind. All of that should lead to one attack being a wave or a group attack where you can get multiple people at once, and one of those should be an individual attack. See, in Mercenaries, one of the best ways to get extra time, especially in the early games, is to use a character or a certain melee from that character, and it would hit multiple enemies at once. Let's keep that, because that's kind of a small way to increase our skill gap. But for players who can play over time and not necessarily need to get extremely good at the game, they just need to maybe get better at a character. Only one of their attacks should be for individuals, and the other attack should be for groups. That's kind of the best way to do it. Ground attacks can be universal, and to me personally, I wouldn't have any melee attacks from behind. But if you are going to do that, I do feel they should be unique to each character. Beyond that, the time bonus from melee should be flat, because in RE6, the parries and the coups add more time, and that incentivizes one playstyle. And in RE4 Remake, the mayhem nets more time, whether you melee or shoot or anything like that. Let's remove all of that. We don't really need mayhem, and we don't need different time rewards from certain melee prompts. Let's just have all of it be pretty baseline for each character when it comes to melee. We should, however, add a risk and reward system by introducing a block, a dodge, and a parry. RE6 had really good fluid movement. Unfortunately, dodges were almost made useless through the emphasis of parries. So again, let's increase the skill gap just slightly. Blocking should be the quickest action with the least margin of error and minimize damage taken. Dodges should have more margin for error, but set you up to be in a position for safety and obviously not take damage. Parries should be like Resident Evil 4 in terms of setup, allowing you to counterattack immediately, but they have to be precise and will lead to injury if you fuck it up. And they're strictly for counterattacks, not to gain any extra time, mayhem, things like that. It's simply as a defense to potentially keep your combo, because that is the primary goal, should just be keeping combo. And on top of that, there should be certain attacks that kind of require a certain solution. For example, a chainsaw. You really shouldn't be able to block a chainsaw. That should kill you. But you should have to basically dodge a chainsaw swing or attack, because that's what's realistic. Sorry, the whole parrying chainsaw, Leon throwing his knife up, that's way too fucking unrealistic. Like, I get it. This is Resident Evil. It's a video game, fantasy. But, like, that's just too much for me, man. Now, again, this is going to increase the skill gap slightly, and that's what we should focus on. People should be playing this game in order to get better over time, but not to a point where they have to play a specific way to be the most successful. And whether a player chooses to play every single character or just one, the only skill required is simply observation of enemy attacks. Learn the timing by playing the game and keep your audience engaged doing that. Besides that, what other ways can we engage our audience? Well, characters. Eventually, we should have literally every RE cast member. 100%. But initially, we should probably start with just every playable Resident Evil character, from 0 to 8, on top of side games, CVX Revs 1 and 2, and even just start with their most recent appearance, just to have a roster built up. Then over time, we can add alternate costumes, as in they're designed from a prior game, or even alternate costumes from those old games. Make each one feel unique, and each outfit have its own their own loadout. In time, add characters from Outbreak, Operation Raccoon City, Dead Aim, basically until we have everyone. And we can even add, like, Nemesis, or Birkin, or Lady D. These things should be memes and should be fun as hell and encourage, not just one style of play. These guys allow you to do, whatever Capcom decides to make. Obviously, they're going to be more melee-centric, which is of the vibe of the game, so why not do it? And even, I saw a mod for Resident Evil 5 once that had Spencer in his fucking wheelchair. So I think that would be a really great way to do it. And if we want to kind of keep things in the sort of live service realm, you could charge people a reasonable amount for these skins. How much would those be? I can't say, but let's just say if they start us with a roster of 25, 30 characters and each one gets 2 to 3 outfits, I'd say maybe $3 to $5. That's not too bad. If you plan on buying all of them, maybe you get a huge discount at the end. I don't know. But again, that's up to Capcom. That's also up to inflation and all that shit. And the thing is, you have to actually make alternate outfits. Otherwise, people are just going to mod in skins, and Capcom clearly has a problem with that. It's almost like the RE cast is just way too sexy, and leaving us to our own devices kind of shows our love for this franchise in a very degenerate way. Besides that, let's look at maps. Maps should always be free, regardless of what they end up doing with this game. Every time a map comes out, it should be first in front. Everyone gets it. They get to play it. All right. Characters will be the only thing that requires either payment or, extras, or should fall under the extra category. And the thing is, you can reuse a bunch of old maps. Some of these maps in Mercenaries are still fun as fuck. Like, no one's going to care if you reuse the vast majority of these. They've done it before. Hint, hint. What they should do is mix up having some small maps that allow people to kind of get familiar with the mode and increase in size marginally over time. I personally don't like the big maps, especially when you have to comb all over for these time crystals and stuff like that. I'd rather have a relatively small to medium size with fixed points. And actually, on that point, do not move time crystals. They should not be randomized. They should always stay in the exact same spot they spawn every time. Otherwise, people are just going to restart until they have the most favorable spawn. So don't do that. People are going to bypass it anyway. Don't make it a mechanic. Just have them stay where they stay. Have them be relatively accessible and relatively visible for most of the early maps, at least. Let's talk about loadouts. There have been so many weapons used in RE, like from the very first one all the way to now. Honestly, let's start there. Let's just bring all of them in. And on top of that, we should be adding more weapons over time. Again, I don't think that's something that should be charged. I think that's something that most people should have access to. If it does come only on a special character, then we can kind of address that, or not a special character, but like an alternate outfit. We can kind of address that later on. But what we have to do is we have to have categories for these weapons. And I'm going to offer 3, which is a primary, a secondary, and a heavy. It's going to get tricky, so kind of just follow me. But I'll state first off that I am a firearms enthusiast. I do know a decent amount about firearms. And I also served in the military. So I probably have more insight than your average person, especially your average dev for a video game. So let's start with secondaries. Those are basically going to be handguns and SMGs. These weapons should be basically used to just set up melee attacks and not outright kill. That's not to say that they don't have the capability to kill. It's just, obviously, we want to go for as much score as possible. We want to keep our combo and we want to maximize our time. So we need weapons that have plenty of ammo, don't do a bunch of damage, and allow us for the setup. I would basically do every handgun caliber under 44 Magnum. And that actually would include a 357 revolver. The thing is, these firearms that each loadout... The loadouts of each character should have varying degrees of damage. Their baseline melee ability should all have flat damage. The weapons they use should be different. This increases our skill gaps slightly, and it also forces players to really know the kit of their character, and, that kind of encourages replayability. On top of that, that's really what's going to give the distinction between a beginner score and an advanced score. Now, primaries would be any rifle caliber or shotgun, and intermediate calibers, as well as 44 Magnum. These weapons are basically designed to clear a wave or basically whittle down enemies, heavy enemies, so that way you can still set up for a melee attack. Could it be argued that you use these weapons more than a secondary? Sure. Basically, how we're going to do it is just limit starting ammo. If you want to use your primary to, get you to the to mid game, totally go ahead and do that. There's no wrong way to play in that aspect. But to me, whenever we've played and had these heavy weapons, that's usually how I've seen them used and how I've used them myself. So let's keep that dynamic. Finally, we're going to have heavies, which are limited use special weapons that most characters would start with. These could be rocket launchers, grenade launchers, or something like the 500 Smith & Wesson Magnum. These are strictly for killing bosses or immediate kills when trying to save the combo. And I could say from personal experience, that's usually what I would use those for. It's like, oh shit, I just got grabbed, I'm injured, now I need to somehow save my combo, and I'm just going to pull out my strongest weapon and get a quick kill. Ammo should be abundant for all of these weapons, but obviously scale as the round progresses. And I would say heavies should probably not be refillable, and if they are, then there's like a cap of how much ammo you can get, how many times you can reload during the round. We shouldn't be incentivizing people to breeze through a map with their heavy weapons. It's one thing using your primary. And again, you don't have to melee and have the best score possible. You could just kill all the enemies. But heavies make that too easy, and they should be reserved specifically for specific encounters. And we're actually going to talk about difficulty really quick. I actually think we should have difficulties for this game mode. I'll quickly touch on this. I think we should have 3 difficulties. And this kind of harkens back to the old days of like extreme battle, and even takes a little bit of inspiration from raid mode. There should be a normal mode, a hard mode, and a hard randomized mode. The normal would have the traditional 150. The hard would have the 300, which is close to no mercy. And then hard randomized is exactly what it sounds like. The enemies should be randomized. The spawns of the enemies, not anything else. The spawns of the enemies should be randomized, their aggression should be increased, and it should be a mix of enemies from other maps. That could go to like 400 to 500. It really just depends on the map and also how much difficulty that mode ends up having. That's for difficulty. Let's get back onto loadouts real quick. One thing we need to realize is that people are going to rapidly lose interest once we unlock all these characters. But one thing we can do is make each character's kit just slightly more accessible to each player. And the best way to do that is by having attachments. To me, every weapon should have a minimum of 2 attachment slots. The first one we'll talk about is for a sight. The beauty with the sight is you can actually increase or decrease your field of view depending on which sight you use. So, for example, if we put a laser sight on something, in reality, we don't need to necessarily bring the gun up all the way to our eye to be able to shoot accurately. That's all subjective, and that's not weapon safe. But that would allow our FOV to be zoomed out a little bit less. Or I'm sorry, we wouldn't have to have it as deep. We can expand our field of view because we don't need to aim our weapon in the sense of aiming down sight. The inverse of that would be to have a red dot, which would decrease your field of view. So we're pulling in things a little bit, so that way you get a tighter feel for your weapon, and you kind of like I said, some people just want either an expanded FOV or a decreased one. It just really depends on the player. We should have that as an accessibility option, but to tailor it further for each character, I think that's a really important thing to do. And then with a holographic, you could pull it in a little bit more, and then you could even have a ACOG style or a times magnification scope, which would then switch it to first person, kind of like what Resident Evil 4 Remake did. That gives utility, accessibility, and a reason to have now a currency system on top of getting proficient with not just that character, but also helping you get better with other characters. So, for example, maybe you love Leon, but his kit is just a little bit too advanced for your skill right now. But you're really good with the characters like Chris. So what you could do is you could earn money by getting A ranks and then buy attachments for Leon's kit since you already have him unlocked. You don't need to play as that character to unlock money to buy attachments. Now, if you want to do other things when it comes to a character's linear progression, that's cool. But when it comes to attachments themselves, they should be items you can just buy by getting score. Like, that's it. And it doesn't matter if you have the character, if you use the character yet or not. The second attachment I think all firearms should have would be for a muzzle. That could be a silencer, which would increase headshot criticals, which it doesn't really do that in real life, but, because of Resident Evil 4 OG with Wesker, we'll just have it in. We could have a compensator that causes less jump between the shots, and we could also have a muzzle brake, which would minimize the recoil. Basically, how you would have that in gameplay-wise is that the vertical jump from your shots would be neglected with the compensator. The brake, your crosshair reticle would not expand as much when you have that on. So, now you could add other things like extended mags or stocks that make you move quicker when you're aiming, shit like that. That's completely up to Capcom. To me, guns are a means in Mercenaries, and the characters and their capabilities are what's the core gameplay. Going back to the difficulty ranks, besides having a normal, hard, and hard R, which probably shouldn't shorthand that, so we'll say hard randomized, you'll also have grades, and we'll stick with the traditional D to S++. I do want to throw in F, though, for any time you die. I don't feel like people should be getting rewards for not completing or dying, essentially. You should be easing yourself into higher difficulties. You shouldn't just be spamming it, hoping to get more money, and then keep dying, because that disincentivizes replayability and progression by starting small and working your way up. Excuse me. So that's why I think we should have an F. If you don't complete the round or you die, you shouldn't get anything. Now, saying that you should have an S++ rank, I'm sure a lot of perfectionists out there are like, well, shit, when this game comes out, I'm going to S++ every character, every map. Good fucking luck with that. Because what I think we should be doing is having each difficulty have its own cap. So normal should have a cap at S, hard should have a cap at S+, and hard randomized should be the S++. The reason why is, again, that linear progression. We're going to go back to kind of like the old days of gaming where, no one's really holding your hand for achievements. Yeah, you can grind and play on these harder difficulties to get S++, but it's more rewarding for you, and it shows your capabilities by starting small and working your way up to that harder difficulty and actually knowing the ins and outs of the characters, the maps, the enemy spawns, and things like that. You earn your keep. And on top of that, you earn your rewards. And you absolutely should be for doing it. What do people want when it comes to S ranks, S+, all that stuff? I don't know. I come from a Call of Duty background, so I know a lot of people love camos and like a gold skin. So maybe if you S rank all of normal, you'll get like a gold skin for your knife or something. If you do S+ for hard, maybe you get gold flare. I don't know. That's stuff that's off the top of my head. What would you guys want for, taking potentially 50 characters, if not more, S ranking all normal, S+ ranking all hard, and S++ hard randomized? What would be incentive to you to do that? Now, one thing I would think of when it comes to the S++, if you're really that dedicated to do it, I feel you should be able to earn free alternate skins. So if Capcom did want to charge us and you just don't want to spend 5, 10, 15, however much it ends up being, and hopefully it's not in excess of fucking 10, then yeah, if you S++ with everyone, I think like 3 to 5 free fucking outfits is like totally what you deserve. You put in so much work. That's what I would feel is, like that's what would catch me if I had to do that. But, you guys tell me what incentives you'd want. The thing is, this may sound a little bit grindy, but you have to realize this is Capcom. They need to make money. We want to have fun. They need engagement. We need engagement. It's the way that we're going to go about it, right? Um, I think most people would be pretty okay with doing this because all you really need to do is just the original cast. However many people they are, 15, 20, 30, whatever it is. And never increase it with those alternate outfits or those new characters that come to the game. Just beat the game with this and then you'll earn XYZ thing. So, now the thing is when you have unlocked all of that, there should be something really good, like absolutely worth it, that kind of changes the game. And the thing that I think would work best was done in Resident Evil Mercenaries 3D. Oh, that's right. You thought I was going to leave that out, huh? No, no, no. I played that fucking game, dude. And it had the best, most fun thing possible. Customized loadouts for each character. You get to choose every little weapon that your character starts with, and I can tell you it fucking made high scores go insane. So, I actually think you should be able to choose your own class after you've gotten maybe at least an S on all of the normal or something like that. I don't know where to put it or when to have it, but it is something that should absolutely be there, and it should just change the game completely. And then you're like, okay, well, that's got to be the end game then, right? If I can just create all my classes and, do all this stuff. Well, not entirely. Now, you may be able to make a custom class, but you need to buy the weapons so your character can use them. So now all that currency we've acquired from potentially not buying attachments, or we've just played the game long enough where we have all the attachments we need, now we're able to buy weapons in our custom pool. I don't know if you would need to buy it for each character or if it's kind of a one-time buy and now everyone has it. I guess that depends on the longevity of the game, and again, if Capcom's going to make this a live service type thing or not. But again, it's not really that grindy. It's just something that keeps engagement for both parties. So, now, we can finally discuss raid mode. I don't mind the mode, and I think it was great for the original DS. But in a console game, we need more. We need something like Extreme Battle Mode or Operation Mad Jackal. Not just little portions of a map. We need something more fitting for Mercenaries. Here's what I think we could do to incorporate raid with Mercenaries. Let's have it so you progress through each map as a character or a set of characters where you kill a set amount of enemies and your score and your time dictates this next scenario or the next map that you go on. As you complete all of it, you'll get a huge bonus at the end. What is that? More score, more currency, whatever it is. But I think that's the best way we can incorporate raid and still have those elements that make it Mercenaries-esque. On top of that, you could have like special mementos or Easter eggs. Things like I said, Extreme Battle always comes to my mind because it's one of the first modes that had something like this. You have to find the bombs, the detonators for the G virus. If you guys even know what the fuck I'm talking about. Or it could just be something like Rebecca photograph, something like that. So finally, then, I think co-op is absolutely a must. I never really cared much for the couch co-op concept of a horror game having a buddy with you. I thought that was stupid as shit, especially because like so many good games were ruined by that. Dead Space 3, Resident Evil 5. But I do feel playing Mercenaries with somebody else is pretty much like a top tier vibe. Like, absolutely. I don't think maybe it should be accessible for normal. Maybe after you beat normal hard mode, that's when it's a little bit more necessary. Because I feel 2 people killing 150 enemies is just going to go by way too quick. So, that's me. Maybe you guys have different opinions on it. I feel, however, though, with hard randomized, you could probably argue 3 or 4 people would, be really good in that mode. But that kind of depends, on the replayability aspect, how difficult it is, and what Capcom wants to do. So, yeah, I just ran through a lot of stuff there. Part of this was scripted, so hopefully it didn't sound too audible book reading-ish. But that's what I think we could do to make the next Mercenaries mode top tier. We need every character playable, if not outright from the start, over time. We need alternate skins. We need huge selection of maps, weapons, things to just engage us. And again, I think this could work well as a live service model. I know a lot of people don't like that as a concept. I don't either, but it is the way of the world, and at the very least, we have a game mode that has documented love and interest. It takes mechanics most games already have, and it puts them in a relatively accessible environment. So, you guys tell me what you think the next Mercenaries mode should have, or if it's going to be a standalone game like they tried with Resident Evil Mercenaries 3D, which I'm not even going to touch on that. I threw it in as an extra thing, but God, that was such a stupid mistake. I think now is the time to make it a standalone, and you have a service model to do it with. But it could just be an extra mode in Resident Evil 9, and honestly, I would fucking love it if that's in there too. So, you guys tell me what you think. Thanks.